All right, we're going to get started. Thanks for joining us for this webinar and demonstrating the eSettlements PeopleSoft application. We're going to go through and do some introductions so you know who are the people that are talking to you through this webinar. We are going to hear from the Director of On-Premise Apps, Corey Heinen, is going to kick off our session in a moment. We'll do a very brief introduction of MyPro Consulting, looking at the people that have registered for this webinar. Many folks know MyPro, but there are also a fair number that have not met us, so we'll be very quick in letting you know who we are and what we do. We won't spend a lot of time on that. Feel free to hit our website, reach out to us directly, or at the end we'll have time for questions. We want to spend most of our time on the eSettlements demo itself, and that's what we'll be focused on. At the end, we'll also cover how you can implement this module. Obviously, there's lots of different approaches, lots of different paths you can take, and we're going to cover one of those. We call it a quick start program. We choose to implement the eSettlements application, and then we'll wrap up with questions. So, as you're, if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the on the question element for us to take a look at and answer. So my name is Jeff McAuliffe. I'm the co-founder and managing partner of MyPro Consulting. I was with PeopleSoft for 9 years. And at the time of the Oracle acquisition back in 2005, there were a few of us at PeopleSoft that saw an opportunity to continue supporting the PeopleSoft community. We were very passionate about the PeopleSoft product and wanted to help the PeopleSoft community continue using the PeopleSoft application. So a few of us left PeopleSoft at that time and we started MyPro Consulting. We'll talk a little bit about MyPro more in a moment. We're going to hear in a moment from Corey Heinen, who's the Director of Healthcare and State and Local Government for the On-Premise Solutions team at Oracle. If you have any license questions or questions regarding the applications or getting more modules, it'll be somebody from his team that would be able to help you out. Our demo today will be done by Doug Gray. He is a Master Principal Consultant. That's not an easy certification to get. Doug has spent more than 25 years in demoing the PeopleSoft application. He was at PeopleSoft before the acquisition and stayed with Oracle afterwards. And he has a lot of experience in demoing the PeopleSoft financial and supply chain modules. And finally, we'll hear from Larry Zagata, who's a managing partner with MyPro, and he'll cover the implementation option, the Quick Start program, to give you an idea of how you can implement the application if you'd like to. So let's get started, and I'm going to let Corey, you can kick us off.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff. So my name is Corey Heinen. I run teams that cover both healthcare and public sector for on-premise applications exclusively. So we are part of an organization called Applications Unlimited, and our mission is to champion the continued investments in PeopleSoft, as well as the industry-leading commitment for premier support through 2031, a date which we continue to push out each year. So you can see my contact information on the slide. Please don't hesitate to reach out to get connected with the Apps Unlimited rep as assigned to your organization. I can help you direct you as needed. So today we have MyPro with us to provide a look at eSettlements. MyPro is one of the only a few Oracle partners that are part of our managed partner program for PeopleSoft. This means they have been identified as having a superior practice built specifically around PeopleSoft, and also have demonstrated the ability to provide significant value to their PeopleSoft clients. eSettlements has been getting an increasing amount of attention recently from our healthcare clients. And so with that, I am excited to pass the baton on to Doug Gray, who will bring you the rest of the way through this module. So thanks, Doug.
Thanks, Corey. And I'm going to jump in and just give you the 30-second commercial before I release it to Doug. Appreciate that. So for those that aren't aware of who we are, I mentioned briefly that we started in 2005, specifically focused on PeopleSoft engagements, and that's all we do. We do optimizations, upgrades, implementations, managed services, We have experience in all the pillars: financial, supply chain, ECM. And most importantly, the thing we're most proud of is our reputation that we've earned with our customers, being candid, having high integrity, doing the right thing. That's allowed us to capture some of the top talent in the industry and keep them. But it also has enabled us to have very long-term relationships with our customers. So there's the 30-second commercial. Again, feel free to hit our website. Feel free to reach out to us direct. And of course, we'll be here for questions afterwards. And now I'm going to give it to Doug. Doug, you should have control.
All right, perfect. All right, well, thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate you attending today. We're excited to introduce or reintroduce you to eSettlements, which is an application, as Corey talked about, that has been gaining attention recently, and it really complements and extends your procurement and accounts payable applications by allowing your suppliers to now interact with your environment as well. And what that accomplishes for you is it becomes a very efficient process that really takes some of the burden off of your organization and allows you to share those responsibilities with your suppliers directly. Now, as Jeff mentioned, I've worked with PeopleSoft. I actually started with PeopleSoft in 1995. Prior to that, I did work as an accountant for many years, and during those times, I actually led the implementation of some financial applications for the company that I was working for. That ultimately led to a career change, so that I started working with software companies. And in 1995, as I mentioned, I started with PeopleSoft exclusively. And during that time, I've worked with many, many organizations to help them understand the capabilities that are available with PeopleSoft and how they can leverage that to improve their business processes as well. So again, I'm very happy to speak with you today about PeopleSoft eSettlements. And so from an agenda perspective, one of the things that I wanted to do, first of all, was to introduce you to the fact that within the PeopleSoft suite, beyond just eSettlements itself, there are a number of supplier-facing views, if you will, for procurement and accounts payable activity. So eSettlements becomes part of that bigger solution if that's appropriate for your organization. It certainly can operate with just accounts payable and purchasing as well. But I wanted to introduce you to where this process all comes together. And then certainly we'll focus on eSettlements itself and the capabilities that that can deliver. As Jeff mentioned, we will spend some time doing the demonstration so that you can get a quick look at some of the capabilities that are available. And definitely we want this to be an interactive session. So as you have questions going through the presentation, please submit those questions through your website, and we'll accumulate those and address them either as part of the presentation or at the end of the conversation. But as we think about the procurement and accounts payable solutions that are offered by PeopleSoft, there really are a number of components that allow you to interact and enable your suppliers to interact directly with your operations. First of all, as we think about just the base purchasing and payables, there is a supplier-facing component that is delivered and available as part of utilizing those applications. So with that functionality, you can now allow suppliers to manage a self-service registration. So rather, historically, organizations had to accumulate the supplier information, and then someone within the organization had to enter that directly online. Now we can pass that information to your suppliers and enable them to input their registration information. It's a controlled process so that it goes through an approval within your organization. So once the supplier has entered that information, then it can go through an approval. If your organization approves, then they become a valid supplier within your supplier master records. So that is created automatically, again, relieving the burden from your organization and allowing your suppliers to interact. It's a similar situation as those profiles change. So your supplier has an address change or other information changes relative to the supplier. through a self-service function, they can submit those change requests. And again, that can go through an approval process. So you always have control, but you reduce the burden that's available or delivered to your organization. We'll also talk about a public page. And this is really a page that allows you to share information with the external community. Could be frequently asked questions, contact us information, calendar information, whatever might be appropriate. But all of this information is available through regular purchasing and payables applications. If you hold license to those applications, then you can enable these supplier-facing capabilities as well. Now, the next three areas are really more procurement specific as we think about strategic sourcing, supplier contract management, e-supplier connection. These are all supplier-facing components that allow purchasing information, bidder information to be exchanged with your suppliers. So these components allow, from a procurement perspective, your suppliers to interact. And then, of course, the focus for today's conversation is eSettlements, and that's really about enhancing and improving the accounts payable or the invoice process itself. So as part of this, we'll talk about the fact that eSettlements allows your suppliers to enter invoices online. Again, historically, those were emailed or sent somehow to your organization and someone had to enter them. Now that can be further automated so that the supplier is really driving that process. And within your organization, you're able to approve and process those invoices as needed. A couple of other functions that are delivered as part of eSettlements that we'll talk about as well is the dispute process. So rather than having to call your suppliers to get information, now that can be a process that is communicated online. It's an interactive process that you can record what the exceptions are or why a transaction might be put into dispute and share that information directly with the supplier so that they can respond online. Similarly, if they want to understand the status of an invoice or the status of a payment, they have visibility to that through eSettlements. So those capabilities eliminate the process of having suppliers calling into your accounts payable organization and having someone trying to track down the information. It's all available online and all available through a self-service function. Additionally, eSettlements includes a function called dynamic discounting. Dynamic discounting allows both the supplier or the buying organization to suggest discounts, additional discounts beyond just the purchase order terms. So as a supplier, I might be in a situation where I'm in a cash shortage, as an example. Well, maybe I'm willing to offer a little larger discount if I can streamline the payment so that I get those funds sooner. Using dynamic discounting, I can create that type of proposal, submit it to the buying organization. The buying organization has the opportunity to approve or reject. If I should approve it, by approving that, I'm changing the terms on those invoices that were defined as part of that package. And so those terms are updated automatically and flow through your accounts payable process seamlessly so that now as the buying organization, we're realizing a greater discount. As the selling organization, as your supplier, they're getting their cash more quickly to address their cash flow needs. So the beauty of all of these portal solutions is that we're really allowing you to further automate the overall processes. And with this, you're improving the supplier information management so that now they have the opportunity to maintain the information within your system, recognizing that all transactions that they do are always available for review and approval when appropriate. Now, just a couple of examples. I mentioned a public page, and this is a page that is available to you that you can open up to external organizations, but they don't have to be a defined supplier. It's simply an opportunity for your organization to share information with the supplier community. As you see here, some of the options, I could use I can offer a registration function. So if a particular organization does in fact want to register as a supplier, you have the opportunity to allow them to enter that registration. And as your organization receives it, we can decide and make those decisions. If we do want them as a supplier, the records are all updated automatically so that there's no manual entry. It's simply an approval process within your buying organization. Similarly, if I'm using strategic sourcing as an example, I can use this public page because it's not specific to any single vendor. I can use this public page to allow them to make bids if you want potentially non-registered suppliers to be able to bid as well. You can make that opportunity available. And as we see, I can share information in the form of announcements or any events that may be taking place or frequently asked questions. Similarly, as your suppliers are registered and are defined suppliers for your organization, then you can create and will create through the applications these secure home pages. The secure home pages are specific to a supplier. The supplier has a user ID. Individual users within the supplier organization have user IDs, and they also have security profiles. So you control what information, what functions your suppliers have access to. And recognize that certainly the data is all segregated so that it's specific to a particular selling organization or a particular supplier. I'm not going to see information for suppliers that I'm not associated with. And as part of this process, as part of these home pages, of course, using the fluid interface, what we see illustrated here is that a supplier doesn't have to understand all of the applications within PeopleSoft. They don't really care what the applications are. They're simply performing different functions. So as we see represented here, there are a series of applications that we can open up to our suppliers. As a supplier, I just see a page with tiles associated. And so what is it that I want to do? If I want to work with invoices and payments, I don't have to know that I'm going into eSettlements. I'm simply going in to look at my invoice and payment processing. Or if I'm working with purchase orders or receipts, I don't have to know that I'm logging into eSupplier Connection. That becomes transparent to your supplier organization. It requires no training from their perspective. I can simply identify, I want to work with invoices, I would come into this tile. If I'm working with receipts or ASMs, then I'm going to use other access points. So the beauty of the fluid interface, the beauty of these portals is that users can very easily understand where they need to operate within the overall function. So let's talk specifically about eSettlements. And eSettlements really is about automating the payables process. It really supplies or provides your suppliers with multiple opportunities for being able to share invoice information directly with your organization. Rather than using the traditional mail process where I deliver paper to you, we can automate the loading of invoices in a number of different functions. So I can do it as an upload process using either an Excel spreadsheet or XML files. So I can load that information. It is loaded, it is edited as we pass that in ultimately to accounts payable. For some of your smaller suppliers, and I wouldn't suggest that every supplier is going to enter invoices manually. Obviously, some of your large organizations or large suppliers wouldn't do that. But most organizations also have some smaller suppliers that can use a manual entry function. So as part of the demo, we'll also take a look at the opportunity for your supplier through a self-service function to be able to enter the invoices manually. Again, those can go through a validation process and an approval process so that all of that takes place before it actually updates the accounts payable application itself. But with these settlements, we're delivering the invoicing capabilities. There are a number of inquiries that are delivered as well, so that, again, suppliers can inquire on their invoices. They can inquire on payments and see where an invoice is at in the overall life cycle. So it reduces those questions of research that traditionally or historically have been coming into your accounts payable organization. With eSettlements, as I mentioned, there is both header and line level approvals available. So as these invoices, as these transactions are being processed, the responsible parties within your organization have the opportunity to approve or deny as appropriate. We talked about dispute resolution and automating that communication process. So that becomes part of the eSettlements function to help streamline the communication of those types of issues. When we think about eSettlements, behind the scenes or within the application, there is something set up called an agreement. And that agreement is between your supplier and your AP business unit, or your buying organization, if you will. And that agreement specifies some details specific to the unique relationship of the supplier and your purchasing organization. It identifies what types of notifications do we want to automate. So if through the purchasing process or through the matching process there are exceptions, who do we notify within the buying and selling organizations? So, and how is that done? Is it strictly email? Is it via work list? So I can define specifics as to how I want to interact with my various suppliers. And we also mentioned dynamic discounting, which allows, again, either the buying organization or the selling organization to put forward proposals on how we could automate or help streamline the payment process to realize either larger discounts or an enhanced cash flow when that's appropriate. So eSettlements is really about automating the compliance and automating processes within your supplier to accounts payable communication process. It allows you to streamline the invoice entry with a number of different options of automatically uploading. It allows suppliers self-service capabilities to inquire on invoices and where they're at in the process so that I can more efficiently process those transactions in a timely fashion. And as we see up above, I can also share information. We talked about dynamic discounting, but other examples, online 1099 reporting for suppliers, so that sharing that information, again, in a more streamlined and more efficient fashion by using the online capabilities of eSettlements. As we think about the overall process, first of all, from a supplier self-service perspective, you'll see as we go into some of the invoice processing capabilities, we can certainly do Excel to a component interface. We can do an XML upload. If organizations are using EDI, that's an option as well. So there are a variety of technologies available to help automate the load process of invoices. Additionally, if I'm doing manual entry, I can do a PO flip. So I can simply reference existing PO information to automate the creation of those invoices that will flow through. You can see a number of other inquiries, and again, we'll see examples as we go into the application itself. But by creating these invoices, sharing that information, we automate that invoice delivery process. We identify purchase orders, et cetera, so that we can automate the matching process and flow right through matching, the approval, any dispute management process, so that we're ultimately generating those payments and delivering those back to the supplier. There is a collaboration framework that is part of eSettlements, so that as we have those disputes or that exchange of information or that messaging that goes on, that can be automated within the eSettlements function, so that both your buying organization and your suppliers can share that information online. And it's important to understand that when I talk about your buying organization, I'm referring not just to your procurement personnel, but also to accounts payable personnel. So depending on what type of information needs to be utilized, what type of information needs to be shared, the buying organization and eSettlements provides that information for both accounts payable as well as procurement personnel. There are controls built into eSettlements throughout the process as well. So one example is invoice, what we call pre-validation. So as these invoices are being loaded, the system can validate certain levels of edit, and this is user-defined, if you will, in that we offer a number of options, so you can structure this pre-validation however is most appropriate for your organization. But what it does is it allows you to address the exceptions right up front rather than waiting until we're further into the process. Examples of this would be duplicate invoice checking, invalid purchase order number, or blank supplier item IDs, etc. So these types of checks can take place during the time that your suppliers are loading these invoices. So it becomes a supplier responsibility to resolve these issues as opposed to waiting until they get further into the process and then we find them and have to pass that information back. We can use this validation process to catch these types of exceptions right up front and allow the supplier to resolve the issues appropriately.
Doug, real quick question. Does this have the ability for OCR input?
It does, yes. Thank you for asking that question. So OCR can be integrated into this process as well so that that can be loaded in. I did not include those slides in this particular presentation, but very good question. And then here we see examples of self-service invoice entry as well. And as we talked about, these can be a batch process, but certainly an online invoice entry as well, so that we can upload invoices, we can enter the data directly. And what the system does is in essence, create an invoice within the application itself. So I've got all of that information going forward for historical purposes, and that is what becomes the voucher within accounts payable. It can be done via an upload or certainly direct entry when that's appropriate. There are dashboards and inquiries delivered throughout the application. Here's an example of the buyer dashboard. So this is a dashboard within your organization. And again, these, when we say buyer, it could be accounts payable personnel utilizing this. It could be procurement or purchasing personnel. It really comes down to the fact that multiple people can utilize this information depending on their relationship and responsibility with the supplier. But as we see represented here in the buyer dashboard, I can quickly see invoices that are in dispute, exceptions in the process, invoices that need to be verified. So there is both and these can be turned on and off as needed. There is a verification process before an invoice is submitted. And then there can also be an approval process if that's appropriate, once the invoices have been submitted. So you've got flexibility in how you utilize and maintain the control process, if you will, relating to verifying and approving invoices. But through the buyer dashboard, I've got quick access by simply clicking these hyperlinks. The other thing that I would mention, just so everyone is aware, as you know, PeopleSoft employs and supports multi-currency processing throughout all of its applications, and certainly eSettlements is no different. So I can process transactions in any currency. I can have currency or transactions in a number of different currencies, all being processed at the same time through one eSettlements application. But the buyer dashboard gives my buying organization quick visibility to all of the details relating to my relationship with a particular supplier.
And Doug, can the buyer dashboard also filter by the buyer manager?
By the buyer manager. It's filtering based on the relationship or based on the supplier being identified. So it's not at a purchasing transaction level, it's more at a supplier organization level.
Got it. Thank you.
Also, on the supplier side, certainly there are a number of inquiries, and again, supplier dashboard, as you see represented here. So as a supplier, I've got quick visibility to what are my overall invoice balances. There are aging capabilities, so we can show the supplier how this is aged if you want them to be able to see that information. How many transactions are past due? In this case, you can see I'm not doing a very good job for my supplier because I've got 173 invoices and they're all past due. So we might want to address that issue. But dispute information, proposals, offers through dynamic discounting. Again, I have the opportunity to drill into specific details. I can drill down to the invoice levels and be able to look at all of the transaction information that I need to process these. And lastly, we'll look at this in the demonstration as well, but this is an example of what is called a proposal. So as a buying organization or as a supplier, I can create a proposal. And in this case, I'm telling the system that I've got an invoice or some invoices, and I want to approach or provide some better terms. So this particular invoice was initially established with net 30 terms. So what we see is there, of course, would be no discount associated with that. Well, what I'm going to propose to my supplier is that we want to change those terms to 2% 10 net 30. So if I pay this within the next 10 days, we are in fact going to get a discount, and they will get their money quicker. We'll get a larger discount by doing this. Now, this is a pretty simple example because I just have one invoice, but think about the power of this. If I have multiple invoices that are approaching due dates for the supplier, I could potentially get a significant discount or an increased discount by utilizing this proposal process. Now, it's also giving us some comparison information as to we can identify a bank interest rate. So during this time, how much interest would we get versus what's our discount gain or loss going to be? And so we can net that together. So just to help you analyze where you're at in the process, what really makes sense from a buying organization perspective? Do we hang on to our money longer and potentially earn some interest, or does it make more sense to go ahead and pick up this gain of $19 in this example by paying this transaction earlier? So dynamic discounting helps us understand what makes sense from a processing standpoint. So let's switch over and go ahead and take a look at the application. So I'm logging in, first of all, as a supplier. And as we mentioned, a couple of different pages that you can deploy. What we're looking at here is a public page. So that is not specific to any individual supplier, but again, it gives your suppliers, or it gives your organization the opportunity to share with suppliers information about your organization, information about working with your organization. There's one bid out there that potentially suppliers would be able to bid on, or I could request a registration. So as a user, I can come in and request to be a bidder. I can request to be a supplier. A bidder is pre-supplier, if you will, so I can submit bids and potentially become a supplier, but I can request supplier information that would allow you are allowing your supplier organization to now go through and input whatever information might be appropriate for defining them as a supplier. So what identifying information, addresses, contacts, categorization, so what kinds of goods are they participating with, but they can submit their registration information. And again, this can go through an approval process. And as we see here, I can do this either as a business, as an individual. I can start the process and then save it, come back and continue it later. So it provides significant flexibility and again, relieves your organization the effort of having to enter, first of all, receive and then enter all of this information. Similarly, after I become a supplier, I can also request a user ID. So what's a supplier ID? The tax identification number, and then submit a request for user ID information. The beauty of this process, and something to keep in mind, is that some of your supplier organizations may have multiple people that want to or need to be users within the eSettlements application. you can identify within your supplier organization, you can give roles to an individual so that they could supply or they could assign supplier IDs as well, or user IDs. So it can be an automated process where you allow your suppliers to control the assignment of users. And again, it's all security controlled using your standard PeopleSoft profiles. So with the public page, I have the opportunity to provide general information. The secure home page is specific to a named user and a named supplier organization. So as we saw in the PowerPoint, these are a lot of different functions that are now available to that named supplier. Because it's a named supplier, I do in fact have a profile defined within your PeopleSoft application. And we see here some of the functions that could be enabled for your buyer or for your supplier organization. So here's my supplier profile. And those of you that are familiar with the security profiles within PeopleSoft will recognize a lot of this information. But here's my supplier information for James Scott, my profile. I could change the password if that was appropriate. But other options, I can review and update profiles, supplier change request. So something about our supplier has changed. As a supplier, I can come in and create that information or create that request, which will move through a process of ultimately being approved. But with this request, it allows me to review the information currently existing for my supplier and make any changes and ultimately submit that to be updated within your system.
Doug, real quick, we had a question. Can some of these pages be customized, and can we add screening criteria?
I'm sorry, add what criteria?
Screening criteria.
Yes, absolutely. So certainly, and those of you familiar with PeopleSoft and familiar with the fluid interface, absolutely these pages can be maintained. You can, even if you elect to, you can provide some flexibility for users to personalize the home page. So you could identify a list of tiles, these little boxes. You could identify a list of tiles or functions that are available to the users, and they can arrange them on the page the way you want. Or you could also deliver these pages, make these pages available in a defined format so that the users can't change them. But yes, absolutely, these are configurable, and you are able to provide the information and the roles specific to your suppliers based on your particular rules.
Two other questions, Doug. Who would normally maintain the supplier users and the access to those users from your experience in talking to customers?
It's when it first started, frankly, organizations, the owning organizations, if you will, the buyers in this case, really controlled it. But over time, we've seen that start to change and enable the suppliers to take on that responsibility. Because in your supplier profiles, you can identify a particular role for a user that they can maintain the security profiles for their other users as well. If that makes sense, I'm at a selling organization. I can identify other users within my organization that would also have access. Again, what that does is it relieves the burden falling on your buying organization to have to maintain those user IDs for all of your suppliers. So you enable that as a self-service function for your supplier. And so that has become a more acceptable way of, again, automating the process and making it cleaner and reducing the burden on your internal operations.
Makes sense. And then the other question we had is there a place to upload supporting documentation such as the W-9?
Yes, and I didn't point it out, but through many of the functions, both from a registration perspective, and we'll also see it as we go into transactions here, there are attachment capabilities. So I can attach documents, thinking about the registration, the supplier registrations, the bidder registrations. those are configurable. So if there are documents that are required, supporting documents, as an example, an I-9 or other types of information, through that registration process, you can identify that documents need to be attached. So those are attached, they become part of the record, they become part of the vendor record, they become part of the transaction record when that's appropriate. So absolutely, documents can be uploaded as well.
Can we force suppliers to validate their information periodically?
Yes. So you could establish a control where we're passing information in the form of a notice and requiring users to review their information annually or whatever the time frame might be.
Excellent. And then we had a question that I'm going to circle back after the demo, asking about how we license the how does the license work for Supplier Portal? But I'll ask that after you get done through the demo. That sounds like a question for our friend Corey.
Perfect. All right. So as we get into the application, invoices and payments, and again, the supplier doesn't need to know what applications I'm working in. They're simply looking for different functions. So as we think about invoices, the upload invoice process is simply that. I can identify a file that needs to be uploaded, and we're sharing information, making information available to the supplier that will represent the tracking, if you will, of these uploads and of these other transactions. So as we search for some information, what we have here is a history of the uploads that have taken place. And as we talked about, there are a number of options available. So I can use XML through an Excel file. I can use CXML or an XML-based file itself. There are a number of different ways that I can upload information. And what we see over here on the left-hand side are the status of the various uploads that have taken place. As we review details, we look at an error status, we can see there are 6 errors on this particular transaction. When I drill into that detail, what it tells me is there are invalid purchase orders. So it provides that visibility to your supplier when they're trying to do the upload so that they can resolve that and it can be taken care of right up front rather than someone within your organization having to follow up on it afterwards, after we've loaded them. We look at some other examples here. Another error, in this case, what we see is that there was a duplicate invoice was detected. So through that load process, it identified this particular invoice as being a duplicate and flagged it right up front for us so that our supplier needs to resolve that issue. And one last transaction I wanted to point out, one of the options that you have through the manual upload process is you can authorize your suppliers to utilize chart field information. So to the extent, depending on the types of transactions, and I'm not suggesting you would always be doing this, but there are occasions when I can have the accounting information defined within the invoice transaction. And so we can see that it's doing chart field validation as well for the chart field information that has been defined within the transaction. So through this upload process, there's complete editing so that we're capturing these errors right up front and allowing the selling organization to be able to track this detail. Now, also as part of this process, certainly there's self-service capabilities as well, as we had mentioned. And again, not all of your suppliers are going to use this, but if you think about some of your smaller suppliers, some of the maybe what I'd refer to as mom and pop type organizations, direct entry of an invoice might be of interest and benefit to them. And what we see represented here, again, as these are invoices that were entered from a self-service perspective. I can see the various statuses. We can see notations associated as well. So as I think about this, there's invalid PO information. Who is that assigned to? That's assigned to James Scott. And recent messages, this is from the eSettlements host. There was invalid PO information, was entered on the invoice. I could go ahead and enter my response to that. I can post that information. If it is something that requires documentation, then I can attach that supporting documentation as well. So it all becomes part of the messaging, it becomes part of the transaction, becomes part of the supplier. If we just walk through an invoice entry process, to take a quick look here, again, I'm logged in as a supplier, so the system understands who I am and what organization I'm representing. And it's important to understand that depending on how you defined your supplier organization, I, as an individual, I might be associated with multiple suppliers. So I'm defined as a contact. I could be associated with multiple suppliers if that was appropriate. So who am I representing for this particular transaction? What is my transaction ID going to be? My invoice ID. So I'm defining the header associated with this invoice. Again, I can attach documentation to support the invoice if that's appropriate. As we move to the details associated, I can create this invoice a number of different ways. I can copy from a purchase order or flip a purchase order, if you will. I can utilize packing slip information, or I can add line items directly. So if I inquire on the purchase orders, I can identify what PO I'm entering the invoice for. And again, the system is tracking where we're at in the process, as we see represented up above. So as I look at this detail, I can select my invoice, or select my purchase order, I should say, and identify what line items I want to include on the invoice. So of course we could select them all or whatever might be appropriate. But now as I select those line items, that becomes the line items on the invoice itself. I could continue. If I've got some additions beyond the purchase order, I can include that detail as well. It can be either free form, or as you've defined certain items within your application, I could specify or utilize those predefined items as well. So we've got one bundle of software associated as well. So we'll include that on our invoice, so that now I have those three lines, and we can move through the process, make whatever changes might be appropriate, so that now when we're ready, we'll submit our $36,000 invoice. So I'm submitting that into the verification process. Those of you that are using the voucher build process, ultimately, once verified, this invoice, this GD100 that we've just created, that will go through the voucher build process to actually create the voucher and, again, automate that process of loading details. A couple of other things to look at while we're here. The invoice inquiry information, as we said, there are a number of invoices or a number of inquiries available, both from an invoice perspective, from a payment perspective. So now I can see the details of invoice information, and as we looked at before, I can review any notes associated with these transactions. You can see I can simply click on these to drill further. This particular one is the amount is in dispute, so it's on a payment hold. Again, we can communicate and collaborate online. It's tracking any messages that have taken place. So now as a supplier, I can share this information and drive it back or pass it back to my eSettlements contact. so that we've got a complete history of what the conversation has been in collaborating on these particular issues. There's a payment inquiry as well that allows me to inquire on the payments, dispute resolution. I can see all of the transactions that are in dispute. And you'll see as we go further, there are a number of ways that I have visibility to transactions in all the various states. But I can see what's in dispute, again, be able to drill into details specific to those transactions. One last item to take a look at as well is a supplier dashboard. So I'm logged in as a supplier. The supplier dashboard gives me visibility to my entire relationship with your buying organization. So I can drill into the details to see my 100 invoices that are worth $1.1 million. I can drill into the details of what's past due, dispute, proposals. Notice you have options to view this different ways from a graphing perspective. And certainly I can download information as well and drop this into Excel when that's appropriate. So let's go ahead and log out as a supplier and now come in as the buying organization. So within the buying organization, again, when we talk about the buying organization, recognize that that is a combination of accounts payable and procurement personnel, a combination of responsibilities, if you will. If we look at just eSettlements overall, you'll see that there are a number of functions here related to administration of the application, buyer information, supplier information, invoices. From an invoices perspective, there's lots of different options and lots of different functions that a user would interact with. Similarly, from a payments perspective. So there's a great deal of detail available to the end users. As we look at our buyer dashboard, we just looked at the supplier dashboard a few moments ago. The buyer dashboard now gives us information related to a particular supplier from a buying perspective. And here we're looking at different options, of course, than we saw from a supplier view. Here we're looking at invoices in dispute, invoices to verify, and so on. By drilling into the details, my invoices to verify, I can see transactions that have not yet been processed. So they've been entered, but we created that invoice GD100. By drilling further into that detail, this is an opportunity where pre-approval, pre-processing, I can specify what this invoice is. And we can see additional information. You can see PO details, receiver details. Again, if you're doing some accounting, you can attach accounting here if you want to authorize suppliers to do that. But that information can be picked up, of course, coming from the POs as well. So in this case, we had some PO information. We had some receiver details and so on. But you see the options that can be taken down below. So I can deny the invoice. Again, we can review attachments. We can associate messages. So communicating details specific to this invoice, but I can also release it for processing. So that now, as part of the voucher build process, we can create the voucher and load the voucher automatically from this transaction initiated from the supplier. So we can see now that the status has been updated to that, to a status of build voucher. So what we'll do is we'll go ahead and actually build the voucher from this. So we'll let that process run in the background. Go ahead and create that voucher. But taking a look at some of the other functions and some of the other information that's being included, let's take another look, or take a look at a different inquiry process. Here we're simply managing our bills, looking at billing information for this particular supplier, and you notice the variety of selection parameters available. So I can select what do I want to see, what's paid, what's unpaid, and so on. But now, as I look at this list of invoices, I can look at the bill itself if I want to see an invoice format. But one of the other things you'll see, and actually suppliers can see this as well, but is an invoice lifecycle. So where is this invoice at in the overall flow of transaction processing? And what we see is, based on these icons, those that are colored indicate that the transaction has moved through those various levels. We can see that these last three of paid, payment selection, dispute status, those are grayed out, which tells me we have not yet reached that status. So we're currently in the invoice approval process, and we can see that in this case, it's been routed to some approvers. They have not yet taken action, depending on how your approval rules are set up. Could be any one of these could approve it, or maybe they're all required. There may be different options. But once they've approved it, then there's a second level of approvers as well. But the beauty of this life cycle is that I can look at all of the details. Each of these icons is allowing me to inquire so that I can see the details related to that specific effort or that specific area of transaction processing. Another invoice inquiry, and the beauty of this one is that it allows me to look at line item information as well. So I can drill into lower levels of detail when that's appropriate. So here we see transactions that have been generated, and in this case, I'm looking at the invoices as they've been summarized. Here's our GD100, our transaction that we just created. Again, I can drill to the life cycle. I can look at approval status information. But the key here is that I can also see that this is voucher number 451. So our GD100 invoice has been entered into the system as voucher 451. If we went to the voucher inquiry or the voucher entry, I'd now see this identified as a self-service entry within the accounts payable application. Now, one last area to touch on here, and we talked about the dynamic discounting. Just to give you a quick view of that, let's go ahead and create a discount proposal. So I'm utilizing a relationship between my buying organization and the supplier. And again, buying organization is typically your business units. But as we search the transactions that are open for this supplier, again, from a currency perspective, recognize I've got a transaction here for Indian rupees. We've got Canadian dollars, Australian dollars, US dollars. So we support currencies throughout this process. But as I look at these, I've got $100,000 with net 30 terms. And I've got some other transactions that have 2% discount associated with them. But I can go through these open transactions and select what I might want to include within my proposal. At the bank, maybe we can get 0.5% of interest over a period, or 2%, or whatever the number is. I can enter that here, And so the system is showing me what is current for these transactions that I've selected. Where do we stand currently? So a total of $119,000. We've got a $300 discount available to us. Well, what I can do with this tool of creating the proposal is identify that, you know what, we're going to look at some other transactions or other discount values as well. So in addition to looking at a 2%, maybe I want to look at a 3% discount if that was appropriate. So I can have different discount terms established. And now when I calculate the new discount, it shows me that now we're, with the 2% terms, we're looking at a $2,300 discount versus the $324 that is part of the current terms associated with these transactions. So in this case, if this interest rate was correct, we're saying that if I held onto the money, I can make $2,400, but I could gain $2,000 in interest. So I'm still short a little bit. So maybe it's more advantageous to move to a 3% discount over 5 days. And so now that puts me into actually gaining more internally. If that's the way I want to view this, and I want to propose it to my supplier, I can submit that proposal. The supplier will receive a copy, of course, be able to review it online. They can accept, reject, negotiate, so that it becomes an online collaboration in defining and finalizing this process. If it's accepted, then these transactions will be updated automatically with the new terms that we've specified, so that now those transactions would flow through the accounts payable process without being touched. They would flow through, they would be changed to a 3% in 5 days and be paid through your normal payment processing. So at that point, I think we've covered some of the highlights as it relates to eSettlements. Jeff, are there any more questions that we should cover at this point?
Not specifically related to what you demo. We still have a couple of questions that we have to follow up on, but not related specifically to the demo itself.
Okay. Do we want to pass this along to Larry then?
Yeah, actually, I will. We'll transition this, and we'll get started with Larry in a second. But first, I'm going to see if I know Brian had a question, and let me see if I can bring up the attendees. I'm not sure, Brian, if you're still with us, but I'm happy to unmute you. I know you're asking about the license aspect of the applications, and it was unclear. Well, you know what, I'm going to let Corey jump in with an answer. I'm not sure, Corey, if it is in fact the portal or the eSettlements, but I'll let you jump in.
Sure, no problem, Jeff. The licensing is the same either way. So generally speaking, with most larger organizations, you would license it separately for each module. As Jeff alludes to, eSettlements is one module. In short, it's licensed based off of your enterprise revenue for your organization. There are some other licensing options depending on if you're a smaller organization, but typically that makes the most sense. And that would be the same whether it's eSettlements or Supplier Portal.
So you could license either one of those, or you could license both of them, correct?
Correct. They're separate modules. So yes, you could license both of them, of course, or separately.
Okay. And of course, we'll have Brian circle back with more detail if there's additional information that he needs. So thanks, Corey.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. The other question that we got, which is a real good one, is how successful is it to get the suppliers on board and have them use the system instead of getting a copy of invoices and email? So we're going to transition to Larry and let him go through the implementation piece, and he's going to cover that answer in part of his presentation. Larry, the floor is yours.
Yeah, so we'll talk about supplier onboarding as part of our implementation. Essentially, I think everybody can agree not all suppliers are created equally. Some will be more ready and eager to participate than others. So the selection of the suppliers and how you strategically decide to bring them on first and then roll them on are very important elements of your implementation process. So we'll talk about that as we progress through the Quick Start program. So essentially what we're going to go through, just a kind of a preferred method that we've come up with or we've deployed with our customers in implementing eSettlements and some of the other products that Doug spoke of as well. So Jeff, you can go ahead and next slide. So our eSettlements Quick Start, just an overview. This approach is designed to accelerate the return on investment. So typically these are add-on modules. So if we want to get our return and our value as quickly as possible, we want to do it in a manner that supports your ability to be ready and bring on a number of suppliers. We want to take advantage of the features and functionality that Doug went through. And most importantly, we want to do this cost effective, but also do this with a focus on knowledge transfer. So your organization can continue on and bring on suppliers at a pace and manner that is appropriate for your organization. Go ahead, Jeff. So we also want to focus in on usability and sustainability. So we want to make sure as we progress through this, it's not just turning on eSettlements. It's really about designing it in a way that meets your business objectives, your requirements. We're using the tool set to its maximum. There's some good questions about how you can personalize, how you can configure, how you can add required documents to the supplier onboarding process. So we want to make sure all those things are taken into consideration. And then sustainability. So after it's implemented initially and MyPro has left, then we want to make sure that you're able to continue to maintain it and grow it and support it. So those are all very important elements of the implementation process. Go ahead, Jeff. So our approach is really about starting off with a pilot approach, meaning we do not want to try and turn on eSettlements for 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, whatever your supplier number is. We want to take a very measured approach to that process. Part of that decision criteria is, as an organization, how many vendors, how many suppliers can you work with, prepare, train, and support at any given time, any given rollout, right? That's a very important element. The value, or one of the major values of eSettlements, is to take the burden off your internal resources from answering the phone from your suppliers about where their invoice is, why is something in dispute, etc. So some of the online interactive things that Doug's shown will allow that to happen. You don't want to trade that by spending all your time answering questions about training and how to related to the application. So you want to be able to measure that. And we'll talk about that, but your vendor selection, your supplier selection, in terms of which you roll on and when, is a very important factor to consider as part of the pilot and project. Go ahead, Jeff. So the vendor selection. So back to that one key question. So some of the things that we've recommended is choose vendors that you have a strong relationship with, right? So vendors or suppliers that you work with well, that you have a proven history of working with. A lot of times when going under an endeavor such as eSettlements, sometimes you're going to do surveys to your suppliers and say, you're going to ask them about their readiness to do an online type interactive session like eSettlements. So you want to evaluate their readiness through the survey. So you're going to look for positive response, that they're excited about it, that they can handle the technology, the change, the resources can be trained. You want suppliers that are going to provide that feedback, You want suppliers that are going to participate on the project. Ideally, you're going to go through a training process with your suppliers. You're going to actually have a number of suppliers help you test, make sure security is correct, to make sure that the workflows are working, etc. So all of those elements going into selecting your suppliers that you're going to participate initially on the project, and take those factors and then create a rollout plan for continuing to add suppliers until you've got all the suppliers onboarded that you wish to have. Go ahead, Jeff. So in terms of the pilot, the approach, select a manageable number of those suppliers, and this number will be different for each organization, because manageable is going to be depend on the size of your support staff internally, how many suppliers you think that you can train and handle Q&As, etc. during the implementation. We're going to fully set up and configure eSettlements, so the functionality that Doug showed will be enabled. We're going to certainly set up the supplier portal elements that are required to enable eSettlements, and then enable the functionality, a lot of everything that Doug's shown around creating payments and running inquiries on invoices and creating those invoices and going through the dispute process. Will enable all that functionality as part of the pilot. We're just doing that for a smaller number of suppliers. Go ahead, Jeff. And then the other thing we're going to do is train the selected vendors and suppliers. So part of this process is to have very strong training. So again, you don't want to spend all of your internal resources time answering questions about how to. You want to create very robust training, hang that training off the supplier portal, whatever that method is, whether it's Word documents, whether it's videos, whether it's a combination of those things. Have those suppliers participate in the testing process, right, to make sure that initially everything's working, everything's set up as required. And then as part of going live with this initial pilot, do some lessons learned, adjust your approach, and then create your additional roll-on strategy of suppliers that fits a time frame for your organization. Jeff? Yep. So in terms of resources, typically with eSettlements being an add-on module, your organization already has a lot of the PeopleSoft expertise, right? So you have developers, you have PS admin, you understand security, you understand workflow. The missing element is that supplier portal and eSettlements. So the one resource that typically would come from MyPro would be that experienced eSettlements consultant to work with you to make sure that things are set up, tested, training, onboarding your suppliers. Whereas the rest of the skills around PeopleSoft would come from your organization. So we're filling in that one knowledge gap that's really around the product itself. And then there's an important role, the vendor supplier manager, so somebody that can work with and manage those suppliers, interact with them in terms of what's required for them to participate, the training, the testing, the feedback, the positive attitude type information. So all those things to really come up with a complete team to be able to implement eSettlements. Go ahead, Jeff. So in terms of timeline, it's really about 4 weeks. The major activities, kind of upfront, creating that project structure, going through a definition design, we're doing a fit gap, seeing which of those features and functionality you want to deploy, what fits for your organization, kind of creating that vendor onboarding design and plan, creating the design of PeopleSoft, creating the training plan, doing the technical elements of the setup of the portal and the workflow and the security, configuring the product, actually executing and developing the training, participating in the system test, inviting those selected suppliers to participate in that system testing, doing the end user test internally, and then finally rolling out and training the suppliers and going live. So again, about a $96,000 investment to do the pilot. Again, kind of going back to that previous definition, what we want to make sure happens here is that everything about eSettlements that our experts do. Because this would be getting you up and running with the number of suppliers that were chosen, and then you create your roll-on plan. Maybe you'll bring on another 100 suppliers or another 200. And the more roll-ons you do, the more suppliers you're likely to be able to bring on at one time, because you're going through those lessons learned, you're improving the training, you're getting more FAQs posted to the supplier portal to be able to allow your suppliers to have more self-service answers to their questions as they onboard. So the more you do, the faster and better you'll get at your onboarding strategy. Go ahead, Jeff. And then, of course, pilot is something that we found to be very successful doing it that way. But there's certainly, that's not the only way. We've helped customers with just, with the fit gap of what's right for each supplier. And then you can do the rest on your own. We've trained on eSettlements and giving that, implementation knowledge transfer. We've done a conference room pilot, which is a little bit different than this type of pilot in that, you're really doing this with demo data to show and demonstrate how each supplier works, the elements, how you set it up, how you configure it. The only key difference here is it's with demo data and not your customer data. And then, of course, we've always have the ability to just provide knowledge on demand. So if you need 5 to 10 hours of work a week of remote assistance, those are all options. So lots of different ways to implement eSettlements, but that supplier, the pilot approach is something that's proven to be pretty effective. Go ahead, Jeff. And then these are just assumptions. I won't go through them all, but just things like, you're already up and running on AP and purchasing, which are part of the requirements. You've got suppliers enabled, because things like that, where if you didn't have suppliers already enabled and we'd have to set up suppliers, well, that certainly takes a long time. If you didn't have purchasing or accounts payable, for example, obviously that would have to be implemented. Those are just various things that will impact the pilot approach. No customizations and things like that. I think we're one more slide on that, Jeff, but that was the end of the implementation content.
All right, very good. Thank you. All right, so that is our webinar on eSettlements. I'm not seeing any other questions, but we'll give it a minute or so in case somebody does want to throw out another question. Obviously, you can also reach out to us. I have our contact information to any one of us specifically if you have additional questions or follow-up. As the folks that already know us in the community, we like to help the PeopleSoft community by providing information. This session has been recorded. We will post a link to it on our website, and you'll also find other elements on our website that might be helpful, including white papers and other instructive webinars and videos that we have out there. So happy to help anyone in understanding what you can do and the value you can get out of the PeopleSoft application more than ever today. We've seen people utilize the investment that they've made over the years in PeopleSoft and get more and more out of that application. So we're very excited about how the community has come together and companies are getting value out of the application. So anything else that the panelists want to say before we close out? All right, very good. We'll wrap it up. Thank you for attending our webinar. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out to us. Thank you very much.